today, and that is Ian Hatton. Ian is the Chief Innovation and Economy Officer at the City of Gold Coast, and he also serves as the Program Manager for the Digital City project. Under Ian's stewardship, City of Gold Coast has launched Australia's largest and most diverse LoRaWAN carrier network in partnership with NNN Co, with the capability to support more than 600,000 sensors and real-time management tools. Ian's presentation today will detail some of the city's IoT projects and highlight the benefits the city has seen through investing in the network. I will now hand over to Ian.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I get into the details of the presentation, which I've already skipped on to, I'll give you a bit of context about the Gold Coast. So we're the second largest council in Australia. Our annual spend is about 1.6 billion Australian dollars. And one of the things that raises challenges for us is we're a population of about 600,000 people, but we welcome about 12 or 13 million visitors a year to the city. They use our assets, our parks, our beaches, and all of those sorts of things. So it creates quite an unusual environment for us to operate in, that 96 or 95% of the people who use our assets and experience the services we provide are not residents and ratepayers. So a lot of what we do is trying to generate performance benefits and a quality of service level without having just a direct one-to-one relationship with all of our customers. So getting into the IoT environment for us, we've deployed deliberately a strategy that's got three fundamental components. The first part is to try things. So we spent 2016 to 2018 lots of different IoT trials, lots of different trials and telecommunications to understand what the value proposition was. We then made a decision that what we wanted to do was realise financial benefits in the first instance. So rather than trying to be overly innovative and try to create lots of new things, we wanted to demonstrate value to the business to then encourage the decision makers to reinvest that money back into new and innovative things. The third part is kind of where we're coming to now, which is the scale deployment using the bankable benefits that we've generated. Now, what I've highlighted here of the three different types of use case, there are multiple of them. I just wanted to give an idea from our perspective how we categorise some of our IoT and other investments. The four that are highlighted are really those that are moving into scale deployment, and the scale deployment for us doesn't necessarily mean it has to be hundreds of thousands of devices. It means migrating all of the available functions onto an IoT and automation system. When we looked at the financial benefits, the critical bullet point here is the last one, that in lots of the trials that we started with and a lot of our fellow councils were working on, if you just deploy 5 or 10 devices, you don't really get any benefit financially or operationally because your network's just got an anomaly in it. It doesn't change the normal course of business, and you're paying an additional premium to buy a device, connect to a network and do everything else. So we've been working quite hard on working out what the scale and enterprise version of this is. Now, the opportunity for the Gold Coast is to deploy something in the region of 600,000 or 700,000 devices. Now, if you run a cash flow over 10 years based on the cost of devices, assuming a certain level of discount for buying at volume and working across multiple businesses, we think we'd probably need to deploy about 10 million a year in capital. But after 6 years, that goes cash flow positive. This doesn't take into account any of the escalation benefits. This is not about labour cuts or anything. This is just about productivity and reduction in cost of delivering units of productivity. So getting into those four examples, this is one that when the team first started working on this, I wasn't sure what its value proposition was. The challenge was we have in outside Australian primary schools, certainly on the Gold Coast, at different times of day, there's a speed restriction because that's when the big drop-off is for young children. But the vehicles that are slowed down, they're normally controlled remotely over a 2.5G network, which is about to go into life. The change to 3 or 4G would have increased the cost by a significant amount, which was starting to open up questions of should it be manually programmed and deal with all those issues. So you're almost going in the opposite direction of a sort of a smart city or an IoT-based environment. So the team worked with NNN Co and a couple of other vendors to redesign the school signs to work over the LoRa network, have two-way communications, and be able to manage remotely at a fraction of the cost. The benefits here are there's more than this, but the critical component is we developed a two-way modem so that you could extract data and send updates to the sign remotely. The status reporting was enhanced because we could send better packets of data more frequently over the LoRaWAN network. And of course, this is powered, so the battery life is not an issue for us. And the reduced network cost and a few other marginal costs, because we're deploying this across the whole network, is still in the region of $150,000 a year. So given that that's net, whilst it doesn't sound like a big figure, it's almost a net trading benefit on top of getting a better level of service. But again, only realised because we're doing this across the whole fleet. So we're not having to compromise and have two operating models running. This is our biggest scale opportunity. City of Gold Coast has its own vertically integrated water utility, so we deal with potable water and wastewater. One of the challenges in putting smart meters in was what's the underlying value proposition? So the business had always thought that if you put smart meters in, you could reduce the cost of sending people bills. As it transpired, that wasn't really enough to justify the large-scale investment in devices, network, and back-end capability. So we worked with the business to better understand all the different things that could happen through smart metering. And as it turned out, a lot of leaks go undetected because they're relatively small. The billing system in Australia is to provide quarterly bills to the consumer. And normally, particularly for the large consumers, it's when they get their bill and it's 5 times, 6 times what it normally is that people realise something's wrong. Our policy position is then, as long as it's repaired within a reasonable amount of time, we refund 50% of the additional bill. So the customer's still got a fairly substantial liability, and the city's spending a couple of $1 million a year in leak rebate. So the solution was to be fairly close to the cutting edge in terms of this industry, that it's that there's a lot of different network offerings in the market. We were one of the early movers, I think, in trying to make this work over LoRaWAN, largely because we'd invested in a carrier grade network, which we knew would be resilient, and the price point was extremely competitive compared to the alternative, like NB-IoT, various other things. So some smart meters, some we've developed loggers that go onto the analog meters that then communicate over the LoRa network. The first 5,000 of those are currently in deployment, and from probably Christmas this year, once they're deployed, it saves us somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million a year. And on the flip side, the customers are not getting an alarming increase in their bill when it arrives, which is not a great experience for them, but also they're not having to pay 50% of that water loss cost. Another water utility one. One of the experience that happens occasionally, but frequently enough to be a serious problem with most water utilities, is if you get a build-up of pressure in a pipe caused by lots of different things, they can quite often burst. Now, if that bursts in the middle of the highway, that can cause traffic disruption. People will definitely lose service, and in some cases, they burst on private property. So not only has someone got no water supply, they've also got an inundation and a whole load of rectification works that council will not step in to do. So the team have worked across industry to develop a set of valves that run over the LoRa network. These valves would normally run over a SCADA network, but for us to deploy this across the 80 or 90 sites would have entailed about $3 million worth of upgrade on the SCADA network, because you've got to put new hard communications network, management panels, various other infrastructure into areas that don't currently have the connectivity. By running this over LoRa, we've managed to avoid most of that capital cost, because our network covers about 96% of the geography of Gold Coast, and coverage to us means every square inch of that has got at least 2 gateways of coverage. So if a gateway goes out, the system can still operate. And that was critical for our water utility, and I think this reflects on Tony's earlier point of the difference between a community network and a telecommunications network, which is the scale and resilience that's required by the OT operators and others, insurance provide. So what this has really done is take out a significant capital outlay to expand the SCADA network and fix the underlying problem of identifying increases in pressure and going out and rectifying that before it causes catastrophic failing in the network. This is a bit of a pet project of mine, and one that I think for all of us that have been involved is sort of itching to get going at scale, and we're sort of just gradually working with the business unit to make it happen. So we have hundreds of thousands of bins on the Gold Coast, but 3,500, give or take, are in really important locations like beaches, foreshore areas, and the parks. So if I go back to my point of, 13 million people come to the Gold Coast each year, about 1 million of those are international tourists, and just about every one of those will go to the Surfers Paradise sign at the end of Cavill Mall, which is an iconic selfie location. When we ran our trial, the bin outside McDonald's in that location overflowed more often than any other bin, which means that the experience of people, particularly first timers coming to the Gold Coast, was the iconic selfie location was quite often strewn with litter, which is not a good experience. When you look at the graph at the bottom, the average fill level is way below what would be optimum. So again, picking up on one of the earlier presentations, the optimization of route management, locations of bins, size of bins, the real-time management reporting of if a bin gets moved or some other damage is incurred is all possible. And running over the LoRa network, we've built out a business case that shows that it's basically $500,000 of bankable financial benefit. Our view on this one is you would just provide more services with the money. So rather than over-servicing every bin, you would have a more dynamic environment where the ambition would be for no bin to overflow and for bins to generally be emptied when they're set at an level. What you can build over the top of this, of course, is automation tools that refine the compute and start to really drive down the asset cost of the fleet in particular. And we think you could reduce by a number of vehicles the fleet that does this. So starting to wrap all this together, there are 4 examples of where we've generated primarily bankable benefit, but at the same time, a customer experience benefit, either in reducing a bad experience or enhancing an existing experience. Now, what we've found is that the IoT industry, particularly in government circles, is very immature, and there's a genuine fear that technology equals job loss. So there's been a real sort of major lesson for us in trying to work with the business. The challenge there, of course, is the business tend to be subject matter experts on bin emptying or something like that. So they need quite a lot of help with understanding the technology, how to deploy it, and how to realize the benefits. So our process for that is generally deep thinking, work with the operational units, but they always own the project. The point was made earlier about interoperability. We've worked very hard with the service departments to make sure that the LoRa network, in our case, becomes one of the focal points for driving interoperability. So we don't buy separate networks, we don't run on third-party networks, and then get into proprietary environments. So we can't get the benefit of bringing all the data together. And the fundamental way we work, and this is certainly how we've worked with NNNCO in the couple of years we've been working with them, is if there's a benefit for us and a benefit for them, then we can collaborate more cleanly and easily and both strive to realize those benefits. But identifying those genuine benefits up front is critical. And quite often we observe projects not working because it's a push and pull as opposed to everyone pulling in the same direction. The other challenge, I mentioned it earlier, is trying to do this at scale. So if I go back to our model, there's some delicate balance between doing trials and then converting that into a scale business case. Of course, what you're doing with a trial is proving the technology works and understanding the price point and performance. That's got to convert into scale deployment to really realize the benefits. And from our point of view, that's, we're confident enough in the scale of the network that convinced us to invest in a carrier grade, citywide network. And the other thing is, this is just not a traditional IT project. Rolling out IoT is largely a business-led endeavor with a load of technical support, not the traditional IT support and off-the-shelf purchasing. There's a lot of R&D, a lot of joint development required. So that's something we didn't go down the path of it being traditional IT, and I think that's been borne out as a good thing. And then just to wrap up, what next for us? Well, we've got a 10-year proposal going to our executive to build out scale IoT over the LoRa network. We'll be building off that operational efficiency dynamic to focus more on public value customer experience. And we're also going to be coupling the IoT with other information we have from our Wi-Fi network and other sources to understand where do people use assets, how do they use assets, what times a day, what gives people a good experience or a bad experience. we'll continue to use our LoRa network, and our outcomes will largely move from just bankable operational outcomes to citywide economy and other benefits. And with that, back to you, Laura.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Ian. Some really interesting, real world examples of a network being used today, which I think is what's really fascinating about the work that you're doing right now.